It's like she knows once I click to go live. Um, I was looking at my email, nothing there. Today was like sad. I woke up sad, but then I thought, it's trash day. Why don't I try to like put bags into the barrel like as much as I could squeeze before it comes? And so when did I start? Like around like 9 or so? And I was able to do, I think, over 4 bags. Um, I kinda didn't, like, keep track. I fell asleep sitting it. And CDs I found in the garage, the Mickeys. Um, then this sweater. Um, and so some of the stuff, like, I posted, but some of it, I was just like going out, go out again and see if I could do another bag. And so now as I sit here right now, I do feel, you know, despite everything, how sad I am, this little part of me that's like, you know what? I made some progress. Um, Maybe one day I'll have my garage back. But now I have 2 empty barrels, so I can start refilling them. I'm really looking forward to reading tonight because let me tell you, this mystery, all these mysteries, um, I don't know. Like I cannot guess. I mean, how these are gonna come together, and it's not gonna be tonight. I mean, it's not gonna end tonight. There's so much more to go. So, let's dive back into it. I got you right here. You got the book, got the feel, got nice coffee I just made. Decaf, like yummalicious. Yeah, everything that I showed you today that I got rid of, declutterifying. Um, mm, okay, so it's hi, I see you. Thursdays are inherently sad. uh, okay, so it's day 1 still. Thank you guys for the support. It means a lot. I mean, really. And she learns that day the answer to the question she has had since the start of camp. What are they actually supposed to yell when lost? Their instructions stop short of the answer. As it turns out, Tracy yells, "I'm lost!" Oh, hi, John. We're just getting started. Uncanny. You're an AI can. Ron. She yells this continuously in a kind of hysterical chant. Then, remembering that she is supposed to conserve her voice, she pauses for longer intervals. At first, shouting this ridiculous phrase, she sees with self loathing and embarrassment, certain that she is only a stone's throw from the edge of the woods, certain that some 10-year-old camper will at any moment come wandering over in his uniform, looking scornful, pointing in the direction of the camp. Still, she continues to shout it, resigned to her fate. Better to get it over with, she thinks. Oh, thank you, Martino. I'm just gonna check if yeah, Judita was okay. Jacob is day one because I'm thinking if I was writing this, I'd have Jacob appear. Um, okay, but yeah, Jacob's day one, so they're in the same timeline right now. Her and Jacob in the woods. She's been thirsty for a while, and now she's growing hungry. This alone convinces her that perhaps too much time has passed. And is the light around her growing dimmer? Impossible, she thinks. It was early morning when she struck out, but in the woods, time seems to move strangely. She has entered a different reality from the one she knew. I'm lost, Tracy yells again and again. And actually, if you recall, the name of the book we're reading is called The God of the Woods. So I just noticed it has this like pink like paint and in the front it like presses out this. I don't know if you can see from there that what I'm touching. Anyway, so maybe Tracy's the God of the Woods. Or I'll help her get some water. Okay. Uh, I'm lost, Tracy yells again. Oh, thank you, Rob, for the cacti. The world around her is blurry and green. She curses her vanity for being too proud to wear the glasses she was prescribed this year. This is no longer an adventure. Real fear has settled in. Finally, and she screams without words. Now she does not say, I'm lost or help. Instead, she simply hollers, guttural primal howls that are punctuated every so often with Mom, Dad, a surprise to her. Tracy thinks of herself as independent, even at her age, but here she is, thirsty, hungry, crying, screaming for her parents, who don't even speak to one another anymore. She needs to find resourceful Jacob. After a while of carrying on like this, Tracy freezes in the middle of a howl to listen with her whole body. She holds her breath, hears what sounds like footsteps. She waits for a bit. Hello, she says. For a moment, nothing. And then she hears the noise again. Hello? Tracy stands up from her spot on the ground. She turns slowly, notices, at last, a face peering back at her from behind a tree. Then someone steps into view. Aw, the next chapter is Louise. Day one. I was like, I want to find out who it is. I'm thinking it's Jacob. It's not going to be Barbara. Behind the stage in the great hall are three makeshift dressing rooms, a wardrobe, and a doorway to the outside. For the time being, the state troopers who arrived first have made the whole stage area apparently serving as interrogation rooms. Inside the first dressing room, the smallest, Louise, sits alone in a vinyl chair. 1 hour ago, her CIT, having abruptly noticed the absence of yet another camper of theirs, tore wild-eyed through the grounds of the camp, hollering for Louise, finding her on her walk back to the director's cabin from staff quarters. Tracy's missing too, Annabelle said, breathless. And a nearby trooper said, Who? In short order, the two of them were being walked by a phalanx of policemen toward the great hall, over and over again. On that walk, Louise had tried to catch Annabelle's eye. Remember, she wanted to tell her with her gaze, remember your promise. But Annabelle wouldn't meet her gaze. Now, Annabelle is in the dressing room next to Louise's. Through the thin wall that separates them, Louise can hear muffled sounds she thinks might be sobs. She can also hear the angry voice of a different woman and a man, Mr. and Miss Southworth, she surmises, Annabel's parents, guests this week of the Van Layers. A light tap on Louisa's door, and then it swings open before she can respond. A man walks in, 40-ish, balding. He stops and stares at her a moment, as if realizing something. He's not in uniform. Instead, he wears a yellow Oxford, short sleeve with a red tie. He carries his brown suit coat over his elbow. Louise Donahue? She nods. The man smiles. He's thin, unmuscled. Remember me? He says. Only then does Louise look closely at his face, but she realizes does ring a bell. Denny Hayes, he says, used to live in Shattuck. I know your mom. Oh, she says, Mr. Hayes. He holds up a hand, shaking his head. Please, he says, call me Denny. You're a grown woman now, right? The words shock her, though she supposes they're technically true. How is she? Asked Denny Hayes. Who? Your mother. Louise pauses. All right, I guess. We don't talk much. He nods once, as ready as she is to change the subject. She remembers correctly. Denny Hayes was one of several men who used to float around their house just after her father left town. She glances at his hand, notices the wedding ring there. If he was married back then, she didn't know it, but she wouldn't have been surprised. Nothing her mother did or does surprises her anymore, not even when she got pregnant with Jessie when Louise was 11, not even when she confessed to being uncertain about who the father was. God, thinks Louise, please don't let this man be Jessie's dad. How about you? Denny asks. You married or anything? Got kids or anything? No, says Louise, just working. I got two, says Denny, a boy and a girl, third on the way. Moved away from Shattuck 7 years ago when I got promoted. I live in North Elba now, close to work. Louise nods. Mind if I sit? Says Denny. The dressing room is tiny and bright. The only two chairs in it side by side. The two of them angle their knees awkwardly toward one another, too close for Louise's liking. In the mirror, she watches him fumble in his breast pocket for a notepad and pen. So, says Denny, you're her counselor, the Van Layer girl? Louise nods. Any idea where she might have got to? I don't, says Louise quietly. Denny glances at her. Lady out there, he says, checking his notes. TJ, lady with the short hair. The director, says Louise. Right. She said you were the one first reported her missing. Is that true? Louise nods. Denny regards her for a while, deciding whether to say something. You didn't notice, he says. Didn't hear the door or nothing? Louise feels a tightness in her throat, though she cannot possibly be about to cry, she thinks. She can't remember the last time she cried. Were you in the cabin overnight? Says Denny. Louise opens her mouth to produce a response, but no sound emerges. Denny puts the notepad down, lays the pen gently on top of it. Look, says Denny, I'm really not supposed to give out any kind of guidance here, but for an old friend, I will. He leans towards her, lowers his voice. You don't want to get yourself in trouble here, he says. Don't want to say anything you can't take back, because if you lie, he says, that'll be a problem for you later. Louise looks up at him. He's a foot from her face. His mustache looks damp. There's a girl the next room over, he says. She works with you, I think. I'm going to talk to her next. If it turns out you two have different stories, says Benny, well, that looks bad. That raises questions. I understand, says Louise. You were a nice kid when I knew you, says Denny. I always liked you. I heard some people gave you a hard time when you got older, said things about you and all. I never believed them. Louise waits. Thank you, she says at last. She hates him in this moment, hates his implication, because most of what was said about Louise related to invented trysts with other students, and once a teacher. And that's why I'm going to give you some advice, he says. He stands up, tucks the pad and pen away. Ask for a lawyer, he says, and don't say I'm the one who told you. Louise speaks without thinking. I have one already, she says. It feels good to say it, to watch his expression waver for a moment. Well, good, he says. Won't have to find you a PD then, should the need arise. She looks at him blankly. You know what a PD is, don't you? Silence. A public defender, says Denny. A free lawyer. Sounds like you won't need one of those. Only then does Louise realize what she's done. Alice, day 1. Oh, thank you, Rickster. A grand slam, which you hungry? Put some beans in a tortilla and pretend it's a sandwich, okay? Alice, who was Alice? Okay, Barbara's mom. A nice ranger has placed a towel around Alice's shoulders. After a while, he retrieves another one and places that around her too. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she sits in an Adirondack chair in a patch of sunlight, shivering so badly that her teeth clack. She remembers this from Bear's disappearance. It's shock. Someone told her then. Hi, sexy. Thank you. Arthur. Don't worry, ma'am, says the ranger, crouching down, placing a hand on her knee. We'll find her, okay? That's what all our training helps with. Alice nods once. She wants him to stay with her. Several other rangers with bloodhounds are pacing the camp, looking for scents. Earlier, she was asked to produce a pair of Barbara's used underwear to help the dogs. She had looked at the ranger requesting it, horrified, until he apologized. It's really the most useful garment for the hounds, he said. She couldn't do it herself. Instead, she asked them to find a counselor. They could go through Barbara's belongings on their own. Thank you, Jerry. Well, we need some of her underwears. Now, Peter is in one of the camp buildings with some detective. He's told her not to talk to anyone until Captain La Rochelle arrives from Albany, the same captain who oversaw Bear's case. Peter trusts him. More to the point, he doesn't trust anyone else. Alice looks out at the lake. The truth is, she has no idea where Barbara. Everyone seems to be implying that she's most likely run away, but Alice is worried that it might be something else. Barbara has always been difficult. As a toddler, she threw such terrible tantrums that Alice was concerned about what their Albany neighbors would think. At 6, she showed no sign of stopping, no amount of yelling or bribing or spanking or even slapping. Peter had tried this. A quick strike across the face when things got really out of hand would quell them. Instead, Barbara would shriek ever louder. Terrible screams that made it impossible to think. Bear was never like that. These episodes of Barbara's were, in the end, the determining factor in their decision to send her away for school as early as they did. At 7 years old, she was enrolled as a boarder at Emily Grange, where, by all accounts, she caused no problems at first. But lately, they had been hearing something new. In the middle of the last school year, there was a telephone call from the head of the school, Susan Yoder. She was a formidable woman, a lesbian, thought Alice, who was said to be progressive. She was the first person Alice had ever met who requested the honorific Miss. She had invited Alice and Peter to campus to have a meeting with her in person, something they had never before been asked to do. Peter was incensed. For the amount we pay them, he said, one would think this person might understand what an imposition it is to ask a man to take time out of his workday. Oh, thank you again, Jeremy. Miss Yoder began her conversation with a note about compassion, a word she used frequently, a word Alice had never once heard used aloud in conversation prior to that day. And then she went on to describe what she referred to as Barbara's inappropriate behavior on the school grounds. Most recently, said Miss Yoder, she was discovered with a boy from town in her room. Next to her, Peter tightened his grip on the arm of the chair. In what state, he said. Excuse me? In what state of what was the state of my daughter? He said. What was she when she was found? Oh, said Miss Yoder, reddening, clothed and all that. But, said Peter, well, the reality is we can't be certain what they had been doing prior to Miss Burke's entry into the room. Having an unmonitored boy in a girl's bedroom is certainly not ideal. She smiled slightly, attempting to dispel some of the tension in the room. Kids, Miss Yoder seemed to be saying, with the shape of her mouth. But Peter was still as a stone. Alice could tell some decision was forming in his mind. Miss Van Laer, let me assure you that we aren't too concerned. Oh, did I say that this was? Yeah, it's still day one, but she must be thinking back. Okay. I'm like, what year is this? Okay. We aren't too concerned. This behavior is quite normal for a girl of Barbara's age, said Miss Yoder. We only want to be certain, Peter interrupted. And who is responsible for the oversight? Miss Yoder frowned, confused. Who is responsible for allowing the boy into the dormitory? Well, Barbara is, said Miss Yoder. For a moment, Alice was frightened. Peter was capable, not often, but capable of outbursts. But Peter simply let Miss Yoder's words sit in the air. Who was the boy? He said at last. I'm not sure of his name, said Miss Yoder. Her expression was changing slightly. She was taking on a defiant aspect. Could she too have a temper? Alice wondered. She was usually so preoccupied by Peter's that it rarely occurred to her to worry about anyone else's. How old was he? Asked Peter. I'm not sure, said Miss Yoder, but Miss Burke in West House didn't seem concerned, if that's what you're asking. Peter wasn't finished. Please describe him, he said. Miss Yoder sighed. I was not there to see him, she said, but Miss Burke in West House described him as thin and dark-haired. She had only seen the back of him. Miss Yoder continued. As he escaped through the window, Barbara's room was on the first floor and ran into the woods that bordered the school. What was he wearing? Peter had said. I'm afraid I don't know. Did he say anything? Miss Burke didn't mention. And Barbara? She said he was a friend from town. Peter scoffed. A long silence ensued. Alice focused on the objects in the room. A small marble statue of Lady Justice, blindfolded, on the bookshelves. A collection of books in neat rows, stripped of their jackets, organized by long ago. Miss Yoder's team when she was young, thought Alice. She didn't notice that Peter had risen from his chair. Thank you, Miss Yoder, he said, emphasizing the first part of the name. The woman furrowed her brow. I'm afraid there's more to discuss, she said. In situations like these, we generally take some sort of disciplinary action. Whatever you think best, said Peter. Come, Alice. She rose. But before they left the room, Miss Yoder spoke again. Miss Van Laer, she said, looking directly at her, making a point. May I answer any questions for you? If she did have questions, they would not come to her, and so she shook her head and followed her husband silently from the room. On the way to the car, Alice asked him if he might like to wait for Barbara to talk to her directly. He shook his head. She'll only lie, said Peter. I can't abide it. In the car on the way back to Albany, he was silent while Alice, next to him, struggled to find something to say. She had noticed recently that she was adopting the habits of Peter's mother, who on most occasions sat off to one side, smiling pleasantly, largely letting her husband run the show. When Alice had first met her, She had wondered about her intelligence, but on the rare occasions the two of them were alone, Miss Van Leer had demonstrated a capacity for conversation that went beyond anything she displayed to her own husband. She was even witty in her way. Early for the leaves to be changing, said Alice finally, and Peter affirmed that it was. That night he came to Alice to tell her that a decision had been made. The Emily Grange school couldn't handle Barbara, he said. She'd have to go someplace else. After consulting on the phone with a friend later that evening, Peter had emerged from his room with an announcement. Barbara would be enrolled next year at Elan, a school in Maine for children with discipline issues. He described it as a behavior modification program. They'd have the summer together at the preserve, he told her, and then she would go. Tell Barbara, would you? He said casually. Alice flinched. She'll hate it, said Alice. That, said Peter, is neither here nor there. What's important is setting her on a right path, preventing her from making some irreversible mistake. Can you imagine, he said, but he stopped himself. Alice understood. A boy in Barbara's room at Emily Grange meant the possibility of sex, if not now, soon, and sex meant the possibility of pregnancy. Prior to marrying into the Van Leers, Alice had never met a family so obsessed with its own reputation. Peter had explained to her once, concisely, when they were younger, when Bear was 4 or 5. Banking is an industry that relies on trust, he said. If we wish for customers to trust us to make decisions about their money, then they must trust our judgment in all things. This, said Peter, was one of the reasons that Peter the First had founded the Preserve and Camp Emerson. Their interest in conversation was genuine, but also shrewd, designed to augment their reputation in the region. The friendships they curated with well-connected people over time were just the same, shrewd. Jerry, the Van Leers, were meticulous about anyone they brought into their life and ruthless about those they excised. The thing was, Alice still hadn't told Barbara about their plans in the fall. She was stopped, always, when she considered the commotion that would ensue. Barbara's raging, making a scene. There was something so violent about Barbara, something inherently aggressive that Alice had noticed since her birth, even beyond the tantrums she had as a younger child. The teenage Barbara now seemed permanently stormy, always one misapprehension away from throwing a vicious punch. When Barbara asked to spend the summer at Camp Emerson, therefore, it became, in Alice's mind, another excuse to defer the announcement. Her latest decision was to tell Barbara at the end of the summer that would be best, thought Alice. One swift single blow, and then up to Elan. Perhaps she could even tell her after she was in the car, packed for Emily Grange. After they were safely in the car with the driver at the wheel, she had planned it all out. Barbara, she would say, speaking quietly, there has been a change in plans. Suddenly, Alice is aroused from her thoughts by a sound someplace far in the distance. It sounds like a young girl crying out. Does anyone else hear that? She says. She turns to look over her shoulder, but the ranger assigned to attend to her is gone. Judita, Day 1. Through the kitchen window, Judy watches as the elder Mr. and Mrs. Van Leer move across the lawn in the direction of the woods. He walks with a quick, aggressive stride. She hustles along behind, trotting every few steps to keep up. These men never seem to really like their wives, Judy thinks, not the ones at the clubs and not the ones here. Her own father, as strict as he is with his children, not only defers to her mother, but practically worships her. Once, on their 25th wedding anniversary, he read to her a god-awful poem of his own creation. paper rattling and shaking hands, Judy and her siblings willing themselves not to laugh. Judy gathers her strength once more before turning back in the direction of the large main room with the fireplace. Gathered around it still are young men and women who aren't so much older than she is. She isn't certain how they fit into this picture, but she understands it will be her job to find out. All of them, she thinks, look inappropriately casual, their demeanor almost offensively relaxed. She hovers for a moment, looking down at her pad as if noticing something important on it. Officer, someone says. In her tone is irony, derision. Investigator, she thinks, before turning. A young woman reclined on a sofa with her feet draped over its back is looking in her direction. Her head is resting in the lap of a young man. She looks familiar. An actress, a singer. Judy feels as if she has seen her on TV. What's the working theory? Says the girl. The young man she is resting on puts a hand over his mouth as if suppressing a laugh. Judy ignores her, looks down at her pad again. Who's the prime suspect? The girl tries, sitting up now. Shut up, Polly, says another girl across the room, curly-haired, rubbing sleep out of her eyes. Polly looks to the young man next to her. What are you laughing at? The way you said that, he tells her, is just so earnest. And he allows the laugh he's been hiding to burst forth. I'm sorry, he says, looking at Judy. I know this is serious. I'm hungover. I'm interested, says Polly. I want to know. Judy detests these people and then remembers her training, feels guilty about her quick leap to hatred. Unswervingly, surprising even herself, Judy walks straight through the main room, ignoring them all, and heads down a hallway on the other side. She'll gather her thoughts before interviewing any of them. A part of her acknowledges that she is moving in this direction, away from the crowd she is supposed to interview. Out of personal curiosity, she has always wondered about the homes of the members she serves at the golf club. In this one, she is certain is even grander. And yet, she assures herself that if she is caught by a colleague, she is within her rights to tell him she's simply looking for more people to interview. Some of the doors along the hallway are open, and some are closed. She limits herself to the open ones. Into these, she pokes her head, knocking softly. Most are untidy. Beds, unmade, suitcases, had spilled out. In one, a man still asleep, snoring loudly, apparently unaware or uninterested in the commotion on the grounds. She goes on her way. The next door is closed, but not latched. She puts a finger to it and pushes. Inside, there's a vague smell of fresh paint. The walls are a light pink that makes Judy wrinkle her nose. Someone's suitcase is open on the floor in front of her. Judy steps forward, tentative, her weight on her heels. Inside are feminine things that someone has not taken care of, dresses and slips and high heels and a bikini, bright orange, still wet from a swim. Judy herself, very neat, suppresses the urge to hang it up someplace. Inside the room, it's clear that the walls have been hastily painted. A quick effort on the part of the host to make things look nice before the start of the party. Judy guesses her own mother might have done the same. Her thoughts are interrupted by a rapid knocking on the front door. The voices in the great room quiet. Judy goes to investigate. Next chapter, Louise, day 1. Annabelle, as it turns out, does have a different story. Alone in her dressing room, Denny Hayes has excused himself. He has told her to wait there. Louise can no longer hear the anguished, indiscernible outburst that punctuated the first 30 minutes that went by. Instead, she hears Annabelle's laugh on occasion. She's calm now, off the hook. Denny Hayes is joking with her mom and dad. The crybaby, thinks Louise, the canary. There's no doubt in Louise's mind that Annabelle talked. Finally, a knock. Denny Hayes enters without waiting for a response. In his hands, he is holding something Louise recognizes. He says nothing, sets the brown paper garbage bag on the vanity to the left of Louise, then sits down opposite Louise, regarding her, silent. Louise brushes some nail shards off her lap. The smell of Annabelle's vomit, still inside the potato chip bag, reaches her, and then she retches, hides it. Why on earth, she asks herself, did she assign Annabelle the task of disposing of this evidence? Why did she not deal with it herself? Denny clears his throat. Found your bag, he says. Louise half laughs. Annabelle's bag. Not what she says. It takes Louise a moment to process this. She expected Annabelle to cave. She confessed that both of them were absent overnight, that Annabelle was out partying when she should have been watching the girls, that Annabelle was drunk, high, that she was sick the next morning. This wouldn't have surprised Louise. Annabelle's always caved. What she didn't expect was an outright lie. Annabelle told us about your night, says Denny. My night, says Louise. Did Annabelle tell you about her night? Denny stands and steps toward the vanity, opens the bag again. Louise gags. Denny, on the other hand, betrays nothing. If the smell affects him, he doesn't show it. From the bag, he extracts the beer bottle, the end of a joint, and a smaller bag. This one contains white powder, a substantial amount of it. What the hell is that? Says Louise. Though she knows, of course, she knows what it is. She's been dating John Paul for 4 years. The substance has been a point of contention between them for nearly that long. Did you get this here, says Denny, or back in Shattuck? That's not mine, says Louise. If that was in here, Annabelle added it. Annabelle, Louise is beginning to understand, is not the innocent kid she pegged her for. I've never done coke in my life, says Louise. Denny pauses. But you know what it looks like. Louise says nothing. The lawyer you mentioned, he says, can you reach him? Louise, accompanied by Denny Hayes, walks slowly up the hill toward the main house. Her feeling of breathlessness is unfamiliar. Years of long runs up steep inclines have caused her resting heart rate to be low, her demeanor to be generally calm, but now she breathes quickly, nostrils flaring, armpits damp. John Paul, she reminds herself, owes her this. 4 years of togetherness, 4 whole years of her life. Their relationship has meaning, she tells herself. She is right to do this. It is not unusual to ask one's fiancé for help in an emergency. This is what Louise intends to do. At the top of the hill, she will knock on the great double doors of self-reliance and ask to speak to John Paul McClellan. John Paul, whose father is a lawyer. When Denny asked where they were heading, she left out specifics. All she said instead was that she had a family friend up at the main house. You do? Said Denny, skeptical. In front of the house now, a small group of young women Louise's age are gathered, talking in low tones. They eye her, her counselor's uniform. It's Denny who lifts the iron doorknob. Fly. He batters the door 3 times with stands behind him, heart racing, rehearsing. After a moment, the young woman opens the door, clad in a kind of silk nightgown. She's shockingly beautiful, and Louise blinks, trying to decide if she's famous. Denny, too, looks dumbfounded. For a moment, he stands there, mouth open. Need something? The young woman asks. Denny steps back theatrically, makes a sweeping gesture with one hand, indicating to Louise that this is her show, not his. Is John Paul here? Says Louise. John Paul McClellan? The young woman takes her in. Louise shifts a bit, tugs at her shorts that ride up on her legs. Father or son? The young woman asks. In her voice, Louise can hear an accent, Italian perhaps. says Louise. The young woman nods and disappears down a hallway. Louise closes her eyes, imagines what this person will say. There's a counselor for you, John Paul. Some kind of smirk on her beautiful face, and experiences one moment of reflexive jealousy despite everything. Denny Hayes, she notices, has moved a respectful distance away. She can't remember much about him from the years he was dating her mother, but if she thinks about it, she does remember a certain kindness in him, or at least a lack of cruelty. She wonders if he, like her, is small in this moment, standing before the grand facade of a house in which they are not welcome. She can hear footsteps now, the young woman returning with John Paul. She wonders how much he'll remember about the last night. On other occasions, following a fight, he has been remorseful, conciliatory, swearing off drinking for a time, before returning to it with fervor the moment he reunites with friends from school. She hopes that this morning is no different. She hopes he'll feel guilty about last night rather than enraged. But when the footsteps down the hallway crescendo and then stop, she sees it's not John Paul Jr. who has entered. It's John Paul's father instead. Mr. McClellan looks worried, pale, much different from how he was the last time she saw him, over a year ago now. Then he had been tipsy, pink-faced, swilling strong drinks at a restaurant John Paul had chosen. It had been clear to Louise upon their arrival that the McClellans had not been expecting her. She had believed that the purpose of the dinner was to announce the news of their engagement, but it had not come up at all, and they had thought about it on the way home. The father had been all right on that occasion, nicer than the wife and sister at least. She recalls that the McClellans had talked the whole time about politics, something Louise knows something about actually, something she even has strong opinions about, but no one had asked. Today, standing before her, Mr. McClellan shows no recognition on his face. His expression is entirely blank. Mr. McClellan, Louise begins, and fumbles for words. Go on, says John Paul's father distractedly. May I help you? I'm not sure if you remember me, says Louise. I know John Paul. Mr. McClellan looks at her, head tilted slightly, trying and failing to place her, and then, after a moment, his expression changes. Oh, Christ, says Mr. McClellan, lowly enough so that only she can hear him. Are you the reason he's gone? Louise blinks. Gone, she says, but Mr. McClellan ignores her. Were you with him, he asks. And this she hesitates, not out of fear so much as uncertainty. Sort of, briefly. Mr. McClellan looks impatient. Here's what I know, he says. He looked like hell when he came through the door in the middle of the night. The rest of us were sitting up, talking in the great room when he came in, face beaten within an inch of his life. He was bleeding from his lip. He said something about a girl, that's you, I presume, and stumbled down the hallway, drunk as hell. Mr. McClellan shakes his head, disgusted. In front of all our friends, this happened. Then, this morning, he was gone, no sign of him or his car. Mr. McClellan looks at her as if waiting for an apology. When none is issued, he continues, Is there anything I should know about last night? If there is, you need to tell me quickly. No, says Louise. I mean, not really. We had an argument. She pauses, choosing her words. Threatened me? She wants to say, he was angry with me. My friend had to step in. That's how John Paul got hurt. Your friend, says Mr. McClellan, regarding her. I don't know where John Paul went, Louise says. I came here to find him, to talk to him. I had no idea he was gone. Mr. McClellan nods slowly. His eyes, Louise notices, are much like John Paul's, very light green, beautiful in sunlight, but Mr. McClellan's that morning are shot through with red veins that seem to be increasing in number as their conversation goes on. Do you know what this looks like? He says to Louise. His voice is low and vicious. That he's gone now. Do you understand what this looks like with Barbara gone too? She does, for Louise has been thinking it also. Denny is clearing his throat loudly now, ready to go. Mr. McClellan moves as if to turn back inside, but stops. Are they taking you in for something? He says. Yes, says Louise. What is it? Drugs, says Louise, but they weren't mine. For an instant, the fleeting hope that Mr. McClellan might offer her some counsel crosses her mind. But Mr. McClellan only takes a step into the shadows of his house, as if being pulled inside. Best of luck, he says, and turns and lets the door close behind him. The next chapter is Tracy again, day 1. It's interesting that the McClellan people, they also have the heavy iron black fly door knocker. I wonder if that's like some kind of a club with the van layers. They're all creepy. Okay, Tracy. The stranger doesn't speak. It's a stranger. It's not Barbara. The stranger stands 30 feet away. Without Tracy's glasses, everything beyond 20 is a blur. Hello, Tracy says. Oh, because she's 30 feet away. Okay. But the figure before her says nothing. Instead, it holds a finger up to its lips and then gestures once, a beckoning wave, and then begins to walk silently in the direction from which it apparently came. Its silver hair glints in the scant light that filters through the trees above. The way it moves is ghost-like, and for a moment Tracy is reminded of Scary Mary, one of the legendary ghosts who is always described in this way. A gray-haired lady standing still in the woods. Campers report seeing her only from a distance, then she moves on. The problem with this theory is that this stranger walks, in Tracy's mind, more like a man than a woman. The stranger turns and waits. For a moment, Tracy considers staying in place, but her hunger and thirst make the decision for her. She moves instead in the stranger's direction. They walk for perhaps 20 minutes, Tracy trailing behind. Whether the figure ahead of her is leading her to safety or danger, she doesn't know. And then she sees a clearing through the trees, and suddenly she is oriented again. The stranger points silently in the direction of self-reliance and then recedes into the wild again. Here, ahead of Tracy, a swarm of activity on the lawn, all of the police cruisers, and that crossed her path as she was setting out that morning are parked now at odd angles on the lawn, along with 4 pickup trucks, an ambulance. Tracy wonders if there's any chance that, in the hubbub surrounding Barbara's disappearance, her own absence has gone unnoticed. With this in mind, walk in the direction of Camp Emerson. She picks up her pace. She's almost at the ridge that drops down toward camp when she hears a woman shouting, "There she is!" There's something familiar about the voice. "Barbara!" someone calls. "No," the woman shouts. "Tracy! Tracy is back!" And suddenly her back, still turned to self-reliance, Tracy realizes why the voice sounds familiar. It belongs to Donna Romano. I still think it could still be Jacob that she saw because she didn't really see him. It's because there is the possibility that it could be a woman, like, yeah, it leaves it open, I guess. Judy said day 1. For 5 minutes, Judy has been standing in one corner of the main room, watching as a middle-aged man speaks quietly in the threshold of the front door to a young woman on the other side. The young woman is beautiful and small, with long dark hair parted in the middle. She wears a Camp Emerson polo and looks up at the tall man before her with an expression that hovers on desperation. Judy can't hear what they're saying. The girl retreats. The man retreats. The front door closes. A moment later, Denny Hayes enters, catches her eye, beckons her toward him. "Listen, honey," says Hayes when she reaches him. "I got Barbara Van Leer's counselor with me. I'm going to transport her to the Wells station, see if I can get any more out of her. I'll be back in an hour or two." She frowns. This seems odd. "Don't worry," he says. "You won't be alone for long. We've got a dozen more BCI guys heading this way. Captain's even coming up from Albany." He raises his eyebrows. "Family's connected, you know." She nods. "Who was that man?" she asks. "The one in the doorway." Denny looks down at his pad, searching for the name. "John Paul McClellan Sr., he says. That girl back there said he was a family friend." And Judy look at each other for a moment, each registering the improbability of this statement. "What did the parents say?" "The parents?" says Hayes, caught off guard. "The Van Leers," says Judy. "The last thing he told her when they parted ways this morning was that he'd handle the interviews with the parents at the great hall down the hill. Oh," he says, looking flustered. "They went back to the house, wanted to wait for Captain La Rochelle. I guess they know him." He recovers himself, then continues. "If you get hungry, Encon brought sandwiches. They're on the lawn." She's not hungry, but she does have to pee. After several cups of coffee at the station that morning, she's had to for most of the time they've been here. She's not certain what procedure is. Nowhere in her training did she come across this exact scenario. What do you do if you're in someone's private home for hours and hours with no access to the outside world? Rich people, especially. She doesn't want to ask these people for anything. If she were a man, she'd piss in the woods. She's heading in that direction when she hears a voice. "Excuse me?" She turns. It's a young woman in a silk nightgown. Judy had noticed her earlier when she first walked in. "Do you have a moment?" she says, and in her voice, Judy notices an accent. Judy nods, takes her notebook out. "I want to tell you something," says the woman. She glances over her shoulder. "Go ahead," she says. "Very early this morning," says the woman, "a man came back through the house after being out most of the night. He looked like he'd been fighting. His face looked terrible. He was bleeding." Judy writes down phrases. "Now he's gone," says the young woman. "When the counselor and the other policeman came looking for him, I was the one who opened the door. They asked me to get him, but I couldn't find him. I went all over the house." She raises her eyebrows, puts her hands forward, palms up, in a gesture that Judy interprets as, "Do you see what I mean? Do you know his name?" "John Paul McClellan," says the woman. "There are two of them. I mean the younger one, the son. I found his father and sister instead," says the woman. "They told me he left early. His father went to talk to the counselor instead." Judy nods. This lines up with what Denny told her. "Do you know how the counselor knew them, the McClellans?" "No." "Any idea how the son's face got like that?" "No, no one's talking about it. I think that's strange, don't you?" The woman leans in closer. "His father is said to be a close friend of the family's. I think he works for the bank." Judy looks at her, trying to determine how trustworthy she seems. "Did Barbara's parents see his face like that, Mr. and Miss Van Leer?" "No," says the woman. "They were asleep already." She hesitates for a second and then says, "I believe that you'd have this information by now if they did." Judy writes this down. "Well, thank you," she says. "Is there anything else to add? He seemed drunk. When he came through the house, he smelled like liquor. But all these people drink too much," says the woman, waving a hand in the air, indicating every guest in the house. "Also," she says, "he drives a blue Trans Am." Judy looks up, startled by the specificity of the observation. She had not pegged this woman for someone who would notice cars. "Why do you know that?" she asked. The woman looks at her levelly. "I've been inside it," she says. Judy flushes, then looks down, scribbling. "And your name is?" she says. "I prefer not to give it," says the woman, "if that's all right." She looks down, looks up again at Judy. "I don't know these people well," she says. A friend of mine told me to come, some girl I met in New York City while I was auditioning for a play. I thought it sounded fun. The land here is beautiful, but the people are terrible. I can't wait to get back to Los Angeles. Judy nods. Or Rome, says the woman. Maybe I should just go back to Rome. I had steady work there. Here, not so much. And then, as if catching herself, she smiles at Judy. And Judy, against her will, blushes. What's your name, darling? Judita, says Judy, the not investigator Luptak. Not Judy, not Judita, not, yeah, most Americans say when forced to pronounce her given name. Instead, she pronounces it just as her mother does, Judita. And the Italian woman sighs as if hearing a poem and tells her it's beautiful. Ah. Louise, day one. There's a state police satellite station in Wells, New York, and this is where Louise is driven by Denny Hayes, who, on the way, regales her with the story of his life, describes the two children he's had with a woman he loves, tells her their hobbies, describes the minor trouble they've caused as of late, nothing serious. He waits, perhaps expecting a response, an acknowledgement at least. Louise gives none, and at last he goes quiet. The Wells station is tiny and austere, a concrete building whose only ornament is to pay a payphone on the wall. There's one trooper sitting at one desk. Otherwise, the building seems completely unoccupied. Got a nickel? Denny asks her. When she shakes her head, he fumbles in his own pocket and produces one for her, then gestures to the phone. Go ahead, he says. And then he retreats to a different corner, respectfully lowers his head, pretending that doing so will prevent him from overhearing everything she says. She puts a finger onto the dial, hesitates. She does not want to call her mother, but she has no one else to call. At last, reluctantly, she dials the number to her childhood home, closing her eyes against the memories that the act invokes. Being forgotten too many times at a friend's house, calling home from the nurse's office, sweaty with fever, knowing that no one would answer the phone. Now, like then, it rings many times in a row. But then there comes a little voice on the other end that catches Louise off guard. Hello? Jesse? Says Louise. Jesse? He doesn't even ever answer the phone. He's timid to the point of incapacity, a trait bemoaned by their mother at every opportunity. Jesse, are you all right? Louise, says Jesse, Mom's sick. What kind of sick? Louise asks. She's in bed. Is she awake? Louise says. Is she breathing, Jesse? Across the room, Denny Hayes raises his head. She's okay, says Jesse. Just hasn't left her room for a while. Louise closes her eyes. Have you eaten today? She asks him quietly. She wishes for privacy, angles her back toward Denny. On the other end of the line, she hears a quick, shuddering intake of breath. This is Jesse trying not to cry. She pictures him, the corner of his mouth tucked down. Listen, Louise says, listen, go to Shattuck's, get a few things, and put it on my account. Not Mom's, she says, mine. Ah, Lou, says Jesse, and she can almost hear his face reddening at the thought. To interact with any adult outside the family is almost unthinkable to Jesse. Do it, says Louise. Jesse, I need you to try to do it. You can't go hungry. Jesse hesitates. Behind her, Louise can hear Denny clearing his throat. What should I get? Jesse says at last. Suddenly, a different voice. The operator requesting more change. Louise has none. Cheap stuff that'll fill you up, says Louise with an urgency. Bread and cheese. The kind of cheese that comes in a jar. Get whatever cooked meat you can find on sale. Whatever they've got. Okay, Jesse says tearfully. I'll try. A moment passes in silence, and then he speaks. Why did you call? But there's a click, and the operator ends their conversation abruptly. She stands there with the phone in her hand for some time, gathering the strength to turn back toward Denny, who has clearly heard everything. who remembers her mother, who no doubt witnessed her mother at her worst. You might pity her, thinks Louise. If there's anything Louise despises, it's the feeling of being pitied, especially by someone like Denny Hayes, who is himself pitiable in ways too numerous to count. And sure enough, when she hangs up the phone and steels herself to face him, he is looking at her with a somber expression on his face, his lips a straight line of compassion. Feigned or real, Louise stares back at him defiantly. She says, "You all right?" he says. He's holding something in his hands. It's a paper cup of coffee. He holds it out to her. She doesn't take it. "Sure," says Louise, "except I'm under arrest for something I didn't do. That's the only thing wrong with me." Denny's expression hardens. "Come on," he says, and walks her into one of two back rooms, and places her at a table there, and puts the roughly. A little splashes out, scalds her hand. He tells her that a different investigator will be by to speak with her shortly. He has to return to the preserve. Then he closes and locks the door between them. She's in the jar. Well, I don't know. It's probably a thing in the 70s. I mean, like a cheese spread. I heard them in like plastic containers in the fridge. The jars are usually like not refrigerated at first. Alice, day one. Alice sits up very straight, listening for that sound again. It was a girl's voice crying out. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone of the voice made it clear that the girl was distressed. It wasn't Barbara. She'd recognize both her children's voices anywhere. She makes no move, closes her eyes, which sometimes helps her hear things better. She sits in her auto chair, listening for the voice again. Alice. She's been expecting the young ranger who's been assigned to watch over her. But it isn't the ranger who stands before her, it's her husband, regarding her with something like disgust. "Ah, thank you, Terry." You're practicing being a male stripper. "Why do you look like that?" "I heard a girl crying out," says Alice. "I was listening." Peter looks at her skeptical. "Barbara?" "No, not Barbara." "They did find another girl," Peter concedes. "Barbara's cabin mate. Apparently she went looking for Barbara." Alice nods, satisfied. "Has anyone asked to interview you since the last time we spoke?" "No." "Good." Unsteadily, Alice stands up from the chair. The depth of his seat makes her rock several times before she rises. Peter makes no move to help her, watches her impassively instead. "Captain La Rochelle is on the way from Albany," he says. "Father personally requested him. We'll be communicating only with him when he arrives." "Will he want to speak with me?" says Alice. "No," says Peter. "You're too upset." "What do you mean?" "You're too upset. You've taken to your bed again." She says nothing. She wishes for a pill. "Go on," he says. "I'll help you up to the house." 2 pills. Dr. Lewis's words echo in her ears, as always on very bad days. What is today if not one of those? She'll take 2, she thinks, when she reaches self-reliance. Oh, here we go. Now we're on part 4. Visitors. Carl, and now we're going back to 1961, which is when the year the bear went missing. When Carl Stoddard regained consciousness, he was laid out flat in the back of Dick Shattuck's pickup truck, looking up at the sky. Beneath him, the truck bed was rumbling. Above him, the world was racing. Overhanging tree branches blurred into a steady green. He blinked slowly, trying to imagine how it was that he had gotten to be here. Then he heard Mary Ann's voice. "Thank God," she was saying. "Thank God." She peered over him, her face upside down, her head swaying each time there was a bump on the road. Dr. Treadwell, pressing a gentle stethoscope to his bare chest, said it was an arrhythmia. His was a regional clinic, not equipped for much more than first aid care and the occasional delivery of a baby whose mother couldn't make it to Glen Falls. Dr. Treadwell, 80 now, knew his limitations when they precluded a more formal diagnosis than that. You'll have to go to the hospital, I'm afraid, he said. Carl glanced at Marianne. Both of them knew were thinking the same thing. The emergency room was a much more expensive proposition than a local doctor. They were still working to pay off the mountain of bills that resulted from Scotty's care. Is it really an emergency? Said Carl. Couldn't I call and make an appointment with someone? I'm not in any pain. He was, in fact, in a bit of pain, though only when he exerted himself. Carl, said Marianne. Dr. Treadwell cleared his throat. He sat down professionally. I can't recommend you wait, he said, but if you were to, I would move as little as possible, rest in bed, drink plenty of water. I'd avoid cigarettes, coffee, and, he looked at Marianne, any activity at all that elevates the heart rate. At home, Marianne walked him up the stairs to their bedroom, turned on a light, kept one hand on his back as he maneuvered into bed, still aware of some dull pain in his chest. When he was settled, she sat down at the edge of the mattress. As always, he had the feeling she was reading his mind. It's all right, she said. Carl Stoddard's presence on those grounds won't mean the difference between finding the boy and leaving him unfound. He broke their gaze, looking up at the ceiling. I know the land, he said. You know who else knows the land well? Better than you even? Carl nodded. Vic Hewitt, said Marianne. What if you go back? Carl asked. I'm sure they still need extra hands. Marianne scrutinized him. Who'll look after you? I'm fine, said Carl. Dr. Treadwell said so. I'll rest. Jenny will help. Our Jeannie? Said Marianne. Or another one. He smiled. Most of the humor between them now could be found in the gentle deriding of their remaining children. It was something mundane, something that reminded them of before. When the fragility of their children's bodies wasn't so heavy on their minds. Marianne had once confessed to him, in the wake of Scotty's death, the fear that she would be unable to let the girls out of her sight, to make fun of them ever so slightly, was a reminder to be light with them as well. Marianne placed a hand on his cheek. It was the most generous touch she'd given him in a year. She stroked his hair back from his forehead. He blinked rapidly to prevent himself from crying. You're a good soul, she said. He put his hand over hers, brought it to his mouth, kissed it. All right, said Marianne, I'll go. He woke up some time later to the sound of Marianne's footsteps. They were different from the footsteps of his daughters, who had been traipsing around the house with abandon since their mother's departure. Now he sat up first on his elbow, measuring how that felt, and then, when no lightheadedness threatened to fell him, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and then rose slowly until he was on his feet. Marianne, he called tentatively. Upon receiving no response, he shuffled toward the threshold of his bedroom. The house, their house, had been in Marianne's family for 150 years. It was walled, low-ceilinged, built to accommodate only the insubstantial height of her ancestors. Across the upstairs hallway was the dormer bedroom that all three girls shared. Scotty had slept downstairs on the former sleep that Carl had imperfectly winterized. Now the Stoddard ventured into it, despite the small size of the house. Oh, thank you, Rob. Is it a stethoscope? Okay. I got it right. You could be on the pit. No, I'm just moving over here. It was a surprise, therefore, to descend the staircase and find Mary Ann standing quite still in the threshold of that room. For a moment he gazed upon her rigid back. Inside her Sunday dress, both hands pressing upon a door frame as against a storm. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Strawberry. I love strawberry milk. She spoke her name quietly, so as not to startle her, but still she jumped. What are you doing out of bed? She said to him. You should be in bed. I feel better, said Carl, a half-truth. In fact, the walk down the stairs made him dizzy. He approached her, and together they gazed out onto the closed porch. A twin bed still sat at the edge of the space, but the rest of the room was bare, every artifact boxed up and placed in the basement. Mary Ann's work. She had been asking him to do something to it, to make use of the space in some way, an instinct that Carl understood to be of self-protective rather than cold. Maybe we can open it up again, Carl said now, imagining this to be the thought on Mary Ann's mind. Put the screens back on. It'd be nice to eat out there in the summer. But Mary Ann said nothing. Carl was beginning to feel like he should sit down. He shifted his weight from one leg to the other. How was the rest of the day? He asked. Did they find anything? Mary Ann nodded. What was it? Carl, said Mary Ann. How well do you know that boy? He frowned. Oh, a little, he said. He liked the outdoors. He used to come around asking about the plants we were putting in. Once I taught him how to build a fire. Carl, said Mary Ann, why are you talking about him like he's dead? He paused. How do you mean? You said liked, said Mary Ann. You said he liked the outdoors. I don't know. They did find something, said Mary Ann. A few feet off the path to the trailhead, buried in some underbrush, Ron Shattuck's hound sniffed out a little carving of a brown bear, just like the ones you know how to make. All right, said Carl. That's strange, said Mary Ann. Don't you think it's strange? Not so much, said Carl. I taught him how to whittle once. Taught Bear, I mean. I probably taught him how to make a couple things. Maybe that was one. Does anyone else know that? I'm not certain. I think Vic Hewitt probably does. The boy hung around Vic, too. And then, catching himself, hangs. Oh my God, that is creepy. Because he is talking about him past tense. I overheard them talking, said Mary Ann. They're curious about it. They'd like to find the person who carved it. The police were saying this, and the news spread. It was all we came up with at the end of a full day search. The hounds are useless because of the rain. There's nothing. They'll keep searching, but she trailed off, and then, abruptly, she turned from the threshold of Scotty's room and walked to the kitchen, began to open cabinets, searching them for some kind of dinner. Want help? Carl asked. No, said Mary Ann. You go back to bed. Shouldn't be down here to begin with. She thought for a moment, and then, why do you think he had it with him? Not sure, said Carl. Must have liked it. And why do you think he dropped it? Not sure. Carl took the stairs one at a time, resting for several seconds in between. In his peripheral vision, he noticed his girls regarding him silently from the dining room table, where they were meant to be studying. He waved at them. Back to your schoolwork. On the upstairs landing, he allowed himself to acknowledge why he'd used the past tense when speaking about Bear Van Lair. The truth was, he'd been thinking of Scotty. The two boys were becoming closer in his mind. Okay, the next chapter is Carl, 1961 still. Marianne went back to search the next day, and each evening she reported on the day's events. As word spread, there were more and more people in the field. 100 the second day, 500 the third. The whole town of Shattuck had paused in its daily operations to contribute to the cause. Every adult older than school age, and some children as well, were closed, while the Shattocks and their employees searched for Bear, meaning that anyone who'd run out of milk or bread or toilet paper had to drive half an hour to get some. Vic Hewitt, said Marianne, had been in charge of operations so far. Each day, he sent small groups farther and farther afield in every direction. Still, there was no sign of Bear. What Vic shouted at the group each morning was formal and hopeful, meant as much for the ears of the parents as for the searchers themselves. What Marianne learned in whispers from the other wives was less so. The hounds, they said, had lost the boy's scent quickly on the first day. Ron Shattuck's Jenny had been the one to sniff out the carving of the bear, halfway between the house and the trailhead, and after that she'd not pointed for the rest of the day. The problem had been the downpour on the day of the boy's disappearance. If not for the rain, they said, but no one would finish the sentence. Vic's losing hope, said Marianne. The evening of the third day, you can tell, his posture's different. Carl nodded. It was difficult to imagine a boy of Bear's age surviving in the wilderness. Much beyond this point, even one with his know-how. Are people speculating? Carl asked. Marianne hesitated for a moment before responding. They are, she said carefully. There's a lot of folks who think the boy just wandered off. Out of curiosity or anger, no one's sure. No telling how far a boy his age and size could have gotten before realizing he was lost. After that, she said, well, if he were down with an injury, he might have succumbed to the cold overnight. Or down with an injury. Carl nodded. This was his theory, too, the main one, anyway. He hated to say it, to even think it, but this sounded like the most probable theory, except Marianne continued. But Carl, she said, people have another thought, too. He knew what it was before she said it. The carving, he said. No, she said, not that. Then what? Carl said. Marianne hesitated. There's a rumor, she said. It's that you were the last person to see Bear alive. Carl paused, nodded. That's true. I saw him just as I was leaving. He was sitting on the front steps of Self-Reliance, tying his shoes. She looked at him, blinking. Why on earth did you not tell me that? I have to tell you something else, said Carl. Marianne put her face in her hands. No, Marianne, said Carl, nothing like that. My God. He reached for one of her hands and took it. Bear was afraid of his grandfather, he said. How do you know? He described the change in the boy's expression when he heard his name called. He described what he had said. That's my grandfather. I don't like him much. He did not say outright what he was thinking, but Marianne did. Then she began to cry. What's wrong, Marianne? Nothing, she said. Please. She wiped at her nose. All right, she said. I'm crying because I think you're probably right. Her shoulders were hunched and miserable. Her head was down. And because I think no one will believe you, said Marianne. Neither of them could sleep. Marianne tossed and turned. Carl lay still, looking up at the dark ceiling, feeling the ache of his heart as it thudded inside him. He had managed to find an appointment with the doctor at Glens Falls for Monday morning. Until then, his only job was to keep calm, an increasingly impossible task. At some point, they heard a knock at the front door. Marianne sat up, listening. It came again, louder. Carl didn't know what time it was, midnight or 1, maybe. I should get that, said Carl. But again, When he tried to sit up, he found his vision dimming at its edges. You stay here, said Mary Ann. She moved to the closet and retrieved from the top shelf a shotgun that had been her father's. She loaded it, headed for the door. Mary Ann, whispered Carl, feeling useless. Whoever that is can come back in the morning, but she ignored him. He listened hard. The front door opened. He heard the voice murmuring. He propped himself up. A pause, then, followed by footsteps on the stairs, lots of them, which meant Mary Ann was not returning alone. Carl ran his hands over his face, around his mouth. 3 days of stubble had made his chin rough. He was wearing a white undershirt, yellowed at the neck and armpits. Then into the room came Mary Ann, followed by Dick Shattuck, Bob Lewis, and Bob Alcott. The three big men overtook the little low-ceilinged room. Carl, looking up at them from his bed, felt like a child. Carl, these men have something to tell you, said Mary Ann. The police would be coming for him in the morning. His friends wanted to alert him before they did. We don't believe you had anything to do with the boy's disappearance, said Dick Shattuck. Want you to know that. That's the reason we're here, I guess. Carl put a hand to his chest. What should I do? He heard that. It sounded pathetic. Run for the hills, said Bob L. These yahoos will hang you. Bob, said Shattuck, admonishingly. Sorry, Mary Ann. I don't know, Carl, said Shattuck, head lowered. I wish there was something we could do. For a moment, there was silence in the room. They have no evidence, said Bob Alcott. It was the first he'd spoken. He was a quiet man, a history teacher at the Central School. All their evidence is circumstantial. That won't cut it in a court of law. Carl wasn't certain what that meant, but it was the first thing he'd heard that brought him comfort. They had a brief conversation after the men had left about whether he should, in fact, disappear. Mary Ann was for it, Carl against. His chest was hurting more than ever. He had to consciously remind himself not to put his hand to it, because each time he did, Mary Ann looked like she was going to cry. Finally, at 3 a.m, Mary Ann put her arms around him, holding him like a child, and they both fell asleep that way. At 7 a.m, the second knock came. Okay, so this next chapter is Alice, and for the first time, we're getting 1962, which is the next year after Bear went missing. She wanted to love the new baby. Over the course of a nearly unbearable labor, Alice chanted these words like a prayer. I will love the new baby. I will love the new baby. Peter, of course, was nowhere. Other fathers waited in the waiting room, reading newspapers, but not her husband, who had a meeting he couldn't miss. When the baby was born, he'd be driven over from the bank. The baby would be handed to him, and then he'd go back to work, and the baby would be taken to the nursery. And then, at last, Alice could sleep. She pictured only this as she labored, the moment of rest. I will love the new baby, thought Alice. It hadn't been like this with Bear. She knew she would love him from the moment she felt his first kick. She'd been 18 years old then, married only a few months. She had nothing to do inside her new house, with Peter gone all day. The first fluttering motions of her baby felt to her like gifts. After nearly 10 months of carrying her son inside her like a pearl, she delivered him into the world, and he was no longer hers alone. As soon as Alice brought her son home, people began to take him from her. First, there was her own mother, who lifted the babe from her arms as soon as she walked in the door to the Albany house, or upstairs to wash her hair. Next came the Van Lairs, mainly Peter's father, who inspected Bear as if inspecting livestock. He made pronouncements about the size of his head, the length of his legs. Both were deemed respectable. The baby was handed back. Stop! It's okay, the trash barrels. No one knows. Do you want to go there? No. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Wanna go? Do you wanna go? Make up your mind. All right, come on. Go on. Okay. She wants to go bark at trash barrels. Oh, yep. There she goes. I always think to her it sounds like an animal roaring or something when they roll in the road. Rex was the same way. Ah. The baby was handed back. Last came the two nurses, Peter's idea. One for the day, one for the night. Peter interviewed them in private, so she only met each on their first day of work. The day nurse, Francine, was a matron, gray-haired and thin, who worked with quiet efficiency and smiled frequently and tended as much to Alice as she did to Bear, especially in the months just after his birth. Alice liked her very much, actually, and told Peter so, but the nice night nurse, Sharon, was different. She was red-haired, stout, not much older than Alice, Catholic, Alice thought. She lived at home with her parents still. She spoke often of being the oldest of 10, with a kind of pride in her voice that often turned to authority when Alice questioned anything she did. The worst part was that Peter generally took her side. He's cold, said Alice, hearing Bear cry in the night. She has him in those light pajamas. The house is so drafty. And Peter would say a lower body temperature induces sleep. He's hungry, said Alice. He didn't eat a good dinner. If he starts eating at night, he'll only want more. Sharon stayed with them for several years. At the start of Bear's life, impervious to Alice's disapproval of nearly every choice she made, she hummed cheerfully to herself as she took him up to bed, and Alice watched her go, longing to hold the soft, small body of her son, clad in cotton, longing to feel that weight in her arms. Maybe, she said once to Peter, maybe I could put Bear to bed each night, and then Sharon could be the one to wake up with him if he's restless. Peter, who'd been reading, looked up in annoyance. Honestly, Alice, he said, what are we paying her for? To sleep here? Sharon should be paying us, he said, rent. The best parts of Alice's day were the 2 hours between Sharon's departure in the morning and Francine's arrival, and the 2 hours at the end of the day when they switched. During these 4 hours, with no one to watch or correct her, she played with him or read to him or lay with him on her bed, observing him. He was smart, Alice thought. Most importantly, he was smart. He spoke early and he made observations about the world that shocked her with their clarity. He counted early. He sang in a sweet voice all the things she taught him. Alice liked to sing and repeated them sometimes for Peter at Alice's urging. Even Peter smiled on these occasions. When he cried, he was easy to console, said Sharon. Alice heard him overnight. She always did, but his cries were over quickly. When Bear was two, though, and saying words, he suddenly began to cry for Alice in the night. Mama, he began to say. The first night he did this, Alice sat up straight in bed. What is it? Said Peter, sleepily. Down the hall, Bear called again. Mama. He's never done that before, said Alice. Peter shrugged, turned over. Sharon's in the room with him, said Peter. She'll tell us if anything's wrong. The cry stopped quickly, but Alice couldn't sleep for an hour. What if he had been calling for her because of something Sharon was doing? What if she was hurting him in some way? The next night, the same thing happened, and the next, until one night she heard him say, clearly and plaintively, "Mama, you hear me?" The first time he called out this way, Alice bolted out of bed with an urgency she had never felt before. Her whole body was on fire with the need to go to her son. Peter, behind her, called after her, but she didn't stop. She threw open the door to Bear's nursery, and light from the hallway spilled in. Sharon was still prone on the twin bed in her corner of the room, awake but unmoving. When she saw Alice, she sat up. Her nightgown was bunched up around her knees. She wore curls in her hair. "Miss Van Laer, what are you doing?" said Sharon, but Alice was already at Bear's crib. There he was, her son, soft in his cotton pajamas, his arms outstretched to her, grinning now with glee at the novelty of seeing his mother overnight. She lifted him out, and he wrapped his limbs around her tightly, and her body rewarded her, flooded her with the same calm that came whenever she was reunited with her son. "Miss Van Laer," said Sharon, and Bear said, "Mama," delighted. He put both hands on her cheeks. She put her forehead to his. Then, from the doorway, she heard a different voice, Peter's, angry. "Alice," he said, "what are you thinking?" She turned to him, the boy still in her arms. "He called out for me," she said. Peter held a hand out, palm up, in Sharon's direction. "He has his nurse right here," he said. Sharon nodded once, firmly, victoriously. "Give him to Sharon," said Peter. "Alice." Her son held her more tightly. "Alice," said Peter, and he went to her and took the boy gently from her. Immediately, Bear began to wail and handed him to Sharon in her curlers and her nightgown, and then he took Alice by the elbow and led her from the room. Bear's cries continued. For 10 minutes, he cried forcefully, screaming for Alice. It was torture, a sort of physical distress that surpassed almost every pain she'd ever known. Alice cried too. "He needs me," she said. "Peter, he's calling for me." "Put some beeswax in your ears," said Peter. "Tie yourself to a mast." She didn't know what he was talking about. He often spoke in riddles or used references to literature or history that she didn't understand. She felt he got some pleasure out of doing so, out of flaunting his education when she didn't have one. Not like his, anyway. During the day, the long hours in between her mornings and evenings with Bear, she sometimes tried to make herself read the books in Peter's library that he had kept from college, but generally she got bored of them and went for walks instead or read smutty novels she found in bins outside the public library in town. "Mama," Bear called down the hall one more time, a certain defeat in his voice. One more question unanswered, and finally he was silent. "I can't do this," whispered Alice. She was certain Peter was asleep. He hadn't moved in minutes, but he spoke to her. "You can," he said. "You will," he meant. Now, in labor with her second child, Alice was fighting the urge to push. If she could just keep the child inside her, she thought, if she could just protect him or her from the world for 1 minute longer. But the urge was becoming unbearable, and at last a balding doctor was brought in holding a mask, which she placed over her face without warning. She remembered this from Bear's birth. This is very rude, Alice thought, and then, suddenly, she had no more words. That was when she heard her own name being called, not Alice, but Mamma, a distressed cry that she recognized at once as her son's. Bear was there. He was standing in a corner, 8 years old, wearing an expression she had rarely ever seen on his beautiful face. Over the nurse's shoulder she saw him, and she cried out. "He's there," she said. "He's right there." "Why did nobody notice him?" "He's come back," said Alice. The search was over. She tried to point, but the nurse restrained her. "Please," said Alice, "please bring him to me. I don't want to leave him again." Or him to leave again. Bear was flickering now, candle-like. "Go to him," Alice said. "Please, please, he's leaving." She had to get off the bed. She had to get to him. If she didn't get to him quickly, he would be gone. She rocked left and right. "Miss Van Laer," the doctor said. "Miss Van Laer, you need to keep still." With all of her strength, she wrested her ankles from the doctor's grip and rose off the table. She was trying to get her legs to the floor. In the corner, Bear raised his arms to her as if he were a toddler who wanted to be held. It was unbearable to be kept from him. The doctor shouted something she could not understand. She was weeping, and she could not see well, but she was almost to the corner where Bear was. He stretched his hands toward her, and she lunged for him. She could almost touch him. She could almost feel his skin. Her hands and his hands grasped for one another. Someone took hold of her. She was forced backward onto the bed. Her limbs were held down by the hands and then cords. By hands and then cords. She was wailing now, openly, great yells that shook her whole body, and the nurse put a hand on her forehead, telling her it would be all right, that her baby was coming soon. My baby is there, thought Alice, in the corner right there. Over and over again, she wailed his name, Bear, Bear, and the name itself became a chant or incantation, assumed all of its many meanings at once. Abide, endure, sustain, accept, convey, bring forth, give birth to. If she said it enough, she thought, perhaps the word would summon him in her direction. But it was too late. He flickered out of sight and was gone. He had left her again. The place in the corner where he had been was empty. The mask was placed abruptly over her mouth, this time for longer. Then she slept. It's a girl, Miss Van Laer, said the doctor. She opened her eyes, closed them. The light overhead was too bright. Bear, she thought, and she sat up as well as she could, but still he was gone. My son, she said, but the words came out in a croak. Your daughter, said the doctor, bringing the baby to her. She was wrapped in a blanket. He held her out to Alice expectantly, but her arms were heavy at her sides. Miss Van Laer, said the doctor. He was young, despite his hairline, and sounded frightened. Are you all right? There was a window in the room, and it faced a courtyard. Through the glass, Alice could see a very green tree, waving its branches. Beyond the tree was another building, and then sky. Miss Van Laer, a nurse came and grasped her arm. This will clear your milk up, said the nurse, and she gave her a shot. Before Alice could respond, she had not nursed Bear. She had a half-formed thought that she would have liked to try it once with this child. In the hallway, murmuring, Peter's voice, he'd arrived from work. After a moment, he came into the room, holding the new baby in his arms. He sat down on the bed with her. Two nurses hovered behind him, and he turned to them, speaking sharply. A little privacy, please, he said, and they scattered. Then he turned back to Alice. Peter, said Alice urgently, I saw Bear. He was right there. She pointed to the corner. She could picture him, tall for his age and handsome, in need of a haircut, wearing his favorite blue shirt, his fingernails with dirt beneath them from love of the woods. We have to find him, she said. He's alive, Peter. Peter was shaking his head. It was the gas they gave, said Alice. Her voice rose, and she knew she would cry. I saw him. Peter was shaking his head. I think it was a sign, said Alice. Even if he wasn't here, I think it was a sign that he's alive. She lowered her face into her hands, hiding. Peter hated crying. Inside the dark of her hands, she heard him sigh. Next would come shouting. But instead, she felt his hand on the side of her face. She grasped it. Look at me, said Peter, with surprising gentleness. Look at me. He's gone. You don't know that, said Alice. Peter paused. We have to live our lives as if he is, Alice. He looked down at the baby in his arms, who stretched a tiny hand suddenly upward and then let it down. Barbara, said Peter. He pronounced it in 3 syllables. Barbara. I'd like to name her Barbara. Alice was caught off guard twice. In the past month, she had tried to broach the subject of names with him. She liked Darian for a boy. She had known a boy with that name in her youth and had always found it beautiful, and Charlotte for a girl. But each time she asked, Peter had brushed her off, saying he was busy. Now here he was, next to her, suggesting a name she had never considered at all, Barbara. She knew several people with the name, all of them Peter's age. It was a name she associated more with his generation than the baby's. If that's all right with you, added Peter. Finally, why Barbara? Asked Alice. It's just a name I always liked, said Peter. I think it has a nice ring to it. Barbara Van Lair. And he gazed down at his daughter with such sudden tenderness that Alice said she liked it too. It was important, she had heard, to let one's husband feel invested in the children. Any interest he expressed should be rewarded. It was only later, when they were back at the Albany house after a week in the hospital, that Alice had bought from a bookstore. This was when Bear, whose Christian name too had been chosen. She turned to the section on girls' names and then to the page on Barbara. From the Greek word barbaros, said the book, meaning foreign, wild, or strange. Alice looked up with a jolt. How terrible, she thought. How absolutely terrible to name a baby strange. The book went on. Barbarian derives from the same root, it said cheerfully. Shuddered. Did everyone know this about Barbara? She often had trouble discerning what sort of knowledge was common and what facts were considered obscure. The book sharply, resigned. She wouldn't bring it up with Peter. She couldn't. The name was fixed. The birth certificate issued. She'd just live with it, she thought. There were lots of famous Barbaras after all. All right, we'll pick it up there on Sunday. I don't know if we have any answers on anything. I guess Tracy was found or somewhat, but I'm thinking there's got to be more to the fact that Carl's lost his son. There's something that's weird with Carl. And also, the person in the woods with the gray hair, I'm thinking it could be Vic Hewitt because we know he does, he's older. And that he was described that way several times having gray hair. But other people could too. But it's just thinking of hair color, like because Tracy couldn't see that well. I'm just thinking whatever other clues that we got. When there's something going on, possibly with Luis's boyfriend. Oh, and this guy with the name that is from Terry's favorite restaurant, Denny. He totally could be Luis's brother's father. I don't know what that makes his relationship with Louise then. Like if you never married the mom or anything. Like anyway. There's a lot more to go. I don't even think we're halfway. So we'll see if it's good. I know that it has on there. They're like, oh, also the author of this and that's like, so not like that many, but if it's good and if the ending is good, although we're still ways away, then I will buy another of her books for you and to read to you at least. So anyway, call in tomorrow. So we'll read more on Sunday. I love you so much. I have to pee. My own life coming back to me. Yeah. So you're so sweet.